Zillow is adding climate risk data to all properties on Zillow, and if you're in real estate, this is going to change some things. Let's dive right in. I don't think there's any denying that Zillow is an absolute powerhouse in the real estate space, particularly amongst homeowners. As investors and agents, we often hear things like, well, yeah, but my Zestimate says blank. And we've had to really overcome that of like, well, have they been in your house? There was a goofy article of like the CEO or founder of Zillow's house sold for something like millions of dollars under what his Zestimate was, that we'll kind of lovingly poke fun at of like, they weren't right on his own house. They're probably not going to be perfect on yours. I could go on and on about why Zestimate isn't like ideal. Last I checked, they said they have an 80% chance of being within a 20% range up or down. So effectively, if Zillow says your house is worth 100K, could be worth 120, could be worth 80. Quite a wild swing. And that's because property values are based on condition. It's really hard to know the condition of something that we haven't physically been inside. So what is climate risk data? What is changing? I've got the press releases pulled up and I'm going to show you physically what this data looks like so you can be prepared for it. This is super important if you're buying new projects or have places you're planning on putting to the market. I believe this data is supposed to start showing up like early Q1. I haven't found like a firm date. So let me show you what we're talking about. So Zillow has partnered with a nonprofit that's firststreet.org that we're looking at here to provide climate risk data. So what does this look like? They're going to show you on a scale of 1 to 10 what they think the flood factor or like danger is. Same thing with wildfire, wind, air, and heat, like high temperature issues. Now, to be clear, I don't think that this is bad information by any means for the public to know. I would like to know if I'm getting ready to buy a property, if it's more likely to flood than another property I'm considering, especially with some of the stuff that's been going on with weather in the US, like that might steer me one direction over another. Similarly, if I'm getting ready to buy a new project to flip that I'm planning on putting on market as this data goes live, I want to know what that data is going to say. It's similar to like doing an inspection before you buy a house, because you know when you go to sell that property, somebody else is going to do an inspection. I'm a big believer in like, I want to know what they're going to find before they find it so that I can make sure the property is near flawless when it goes to market versus getting blindsided by a whole bunch of issues that I didn't know about. So Zillow did a press release on this, went out through PR Newswire, and so did First Street. So both sides have effectively confirmed this. I hadn't seen much coverage on it. I think it just got announced back on the 26th on here, but I started to see news articles tail into last week. So I figured I'd inform you guys as investors and agents how this might impact you on both sides of this. So let's look at one of my old homes. So this is a property I used to own. Okay, cool. So we can see here that flood factor, it's a 1 out of 10. Fire, it's a 1 out of 10. Wind, it's a 9 out of 10, which is interesting. And heat, it's a 10 out of 10. Well, it's Florida, right? Like it's not going to get colder. But it's interesting, right? So they post or they share it's dangerously hot. Air conditioning costs are going up. There is data that like they don't let you see. So like, did it ever flood? If when? Flood maps and things. So I'm curious how much of the data Zillow will get. My gut is that you're probably just going to pretty much get this summary because obviously First Street wants you to create an account with them, which is paid after 7 days for more info. I don't see many homeowners doing that. Now, to be fair, on this property, we had a hurricane claim. We did replace the roof and like our air conditioner ran constantly in the summer. Now, I don't know that this is going to vary a ton from, this property to say a house over here, but it could vary pretty greatly between like property in a different part of town. Let's try another address over in Pensacola and see what that one pops up with. So similar heat and wind factor, which is interesting. I looked at my current home address, which I'm not going to show you guys, and a place that I used to rent. And one thing that was interesting was they were both on the wildfire list. However, my current home is a lot higher than the old property I rented, which is interesting because the old property I rented, I know actually burned, whereas this home has not. So that would be good to know, right? Is this an objection that we're going to have to handle? So what would I do with this information, or how would I prepare to handle this? First and foremost, I want to know what I'm getting into. So I would recommend looking up addresses of places that you're going to be buying, so we understand, like, is this going to be a thing? For instance, like maybe you're near some sort of a factory and it gives you a terrible air quality score. Well, is that going to potentially turn off buyers? I think so. Similarly, if you're in an area that's like historically flooded, like let's say you're even in an area that clearly gets wet. Like a friend of mine in St. Charles owns a hunting property with a cabin on stilts right like along the river. Doesn't take a genius to realize, hey, this might flood. But if I'm thinking about buying that place and I see it's a 10 out of 10 flood factor risk, is that likely to turn me off? I think so. And where does that kind of threshold come into play? So I see this likely being an issue on more expensive properties where people have more options. It's kind of like their good schools data. Like Zillow has the ratings for local schools that you can look at. I think people that have kids are going to prioritize that, but to an extent, if you're only pre-approved for X, you might be priced out of the nicer schools, and you might be looking at schools that unfortunately have lower ratings. As real estate agents and investors, we always want to make sure we're fully informed going into any buying or selling decision, and doing the same things for our clients. So if I'm looking at buying a property and I see it has all of these risk factors to it, I might want to consider being more conservative. If I have a client that's really in love with two homes and is trying to decide which one is best for them, these factors, I think, likely might play a large role in people deciding which home they ultimately want to buy. So I would be aware of going into purchase what I'm buying and what the risk factors are. And I would also be aware of, when I go to sell, features that we might want to do that, say, prevent concerns around that. So for instance, if I'm in an area with like a 10 out of 10 heat factor, having a brand new HVAC system is probably not going to hurt me, right? Like, you've got brand new HVAC, should have no problem keeping cool. If I'm in a property that, say, is really high up on the fire factor score, having the property landscaped to prevent damage to the home. This was like a new concept to me until I moved to California. But there's this whole certification you have to do at the fire department of, like, is the property, like, quote unquote safe? It involves like clearing dead trees, getting pine needles off the ground. They even like fly a drone over houses and will fine you if like your grass or the brush is too tall. So being like, hey, that's already handled. You don't have to worry about that. If you're in an area with flooding, you might want to point out things like the elevation of the home compared to surrounding properties. Or if the property has any sort of like drainage system, or even like anything in the basement to prevent flooding, like sub pumps or French drains, etc. At the end of the day, I don't really see this being a bad thing, but I do think it's definitely going to catch some people off guard. And it's one of those things that, like, you can't really fix. And whether we like it or not, Zillow has enough power and influence with retail homeowners that, like, this is kind of just one of those, it is what it is, and be prepared to add it to part of your conversations when both buying and selling. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch today's video. I like to try to keep you up to date on what's working in real estate investing, real estate marketing, projects we're doing, how-tos, and changes like this that are going to impact all of us. If you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe. Again, my name is Ryan Dossey. I'll talk to you guys next time.